The Pope will soon preside over a solemn service at Barcelona's Sagrada Familia on the centenary of the death of its architect.
Barcelona had never witnessed a night like this. On June 10, 2026, more than 120,000 people packed the streets of Barcelona, while millions more watched live across more than 80 countries. For the first time in the city's history, the illuminated star of the Virgin Mary and the giant cross crowning the Tower of Jesus Christ shone together above the skyline. Inside the Sagrada Familia, Pope Leo XIV led a solemn mass before nearly 3,000 guests, including Spain's king and queen, heads of state, and more than 200 bishops from around the world. Outside, thousands of people held glowing candles as drones filled the sky and fireworks erupted above the basilica. After 144 years, Gaudí's masterpiece had finally become the tallest church in the world. But how did one church take nearly a century and a half to build? And what made this night so historic that the entire world stopped to watch? Let's dive in. Why this night took 144 years? It all began in 1882, when a group of devoted Catholics in Barcelona planned to build a very different kind of church. At the time, Barcelona was changing rapidly. Factories were expanding. Thousands of people were moving into the city, and with that came rising crime, poverty, and growing social inequality. Many people believed Barcelona was losing its moral and religious values, and to change that, a deeply religious bookseller and philanthropist named Josep Maria Bocabella proposed building a church in the heart of the city. But it wouldn't be just another church, it would be an expiatory church, built entirely through private donations rather than government funding. The idea was that every donation would be an act of faith and repentance, a way for society to seek forgiveness for its sins. On March 19, 1882, the first stone of the Sagrada Familia was laid. The original architect was Francisco de Paula del Villar. And here's something many people don't know. The Sagrada Familia wasn't originally meant to become the extraordinary landmark we know today. Villar's plans called for a fairly traditional Gothic church. After all, with a project funded entirely by donations, that was about all anyone believed could realistically be built. Construction began on those original plans. But just 1 year later, everything changed. After disagreements over the project, Villar resigned. The commission was first offered to the renowned architect Joan Martorell, but he declined and recommended his 31-year-old protégé, Antoni Gaudí, instead. But Gaudí didn't simply continue the plans. He threw almost all of them away. Instead of building another Gothic church, he imagined something the world had never seen before. Inspired by nature itself, he envisioned towering stone columns like giant trees, sunlight becoming part of the architecture, and 18 soaring towers rising above the Barcelona skyline. It was a breathtaking vision. But for the engineers and builders of the time, it also seemed almost impossible to turn into reality. Yet Gaudí believed this church would become his life's greatest work. As the years passed, he devoted himself to it completely. He spent so much time at the construction site that in his later years, it had become his second home. Slowly, his extraordinary vision began rising from the ground. For a while, it looked as though the church might actually be completed within his lifetime. But no one could have imagined what was about to happen. A century of setbacks. On June 7, 1926, tragedy struck that changed everything. While walking to church, Gaudí was hit by a passing tram. Dressed in old, worn clothes, he was mistaken for a poor beggar. Instead of being taken to one of Barcelona's leading hospitals, he was sent to a charity hospital. By the time people realized who he really was, it was already too late. 3 days later, on June 10, 1926, Antoni Gaudí died at the age of 73. After more than 43 years of work, less than a quarter of the Sagrada Familia had been completed, and now that partially built church stood there with no clear future ahead. Losing Gaudí meant much more than losing the architect. It meant losing the only person who fully understood the extraordinary building he had imagined. Unlike most architects, Gaudí hadn't left behind a complete set of detailed blueprints. Much of his vision still existed in plaster models, sketches, and ideas that continued to evolve as construction progressed. But if Gaudí's death was already devastating for the Sagrada Familia, an even greater disaster was about to erase almost everything he had left behind. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War broke out. During the violence, revolutionaries stormed Gaudí's workshop inside the Sagrada Familia. They burned his drawings, smashed his plaster models into thousands of pieces, and destroyed decades of work in just a few hours. With his sketches, drawings, and models gone, the Sagrada Familia had lost its roadmap. Even if someone wanted to continue the project, how could they? But rebuilding the design wasn't the only challenge. Because the Sagrada Familia depended entirely on private donations, every economic crisis slowed construction. After the Spanish Civil War and World War II, Spain was left economically devastated. Donations almost disappeared. In some periods during the 1940s, the church's entire daily income fell to less than a single Spanish peseta, the country's currency at the time. With so little money coming in, construction slowed to a crawl. Sometimes it stopped completely. Years passed with almost no progress. To many people, the Sagrada Familia no longer looked like a construction project. It looked like an unfinished dream that would never become reality. But even in those hopeless times, a small group of architects believed the story wasn't over yet. Rebuilding a lost dream. By 1939, the Spanish Civil War had finally come to an end, and slowly, work on the Sagrada Familia began again. One of the first architects to take on the enormous responsibility was Francesc de Paula Quintana. But the challenge waiting for him seemed almost impossible. Most of Gaudí's drawings had been burned. His plaster models had been smashed into thousands of broken pieces. The man who understood every detail of the church was gone. So where do you even begin? Quintana and his team started with whatever remained. They searched through the rubble for broken fragments of Gaudí's models. They studied old photographs taken before the war, examined surviving sketches, and spoke with craftsmen who had worked alongside Gaudí and still remembered how he thought. But they also discovered something remarkable. Gaudí hadn't designed the Sagrada Familia by instinct alone. Hidden beneath its beauty was an extraordinary system of geometry and mathematics. By carefully studying the parts of the church Gaudí had already completed, the architects slowly began decoding the same patterns and rules he had used to design the unfinished sections. Little by little, the lost puzzle started coming back together. But rebuilding the design was only half the battle. Convincing people that it should even continue proved just as difficult. Many architects argued that Gaudí's vision had died with him. Since he constantly refined his ideas as construction progressed, they believed no one could ever truly know what he would have done next. The debate reached its peak in 1965. An international manifesto, signed by some of the world's most influential artists and architects, including Le Corbusier and Joan Miró, called for construction to stop permanently. Others were even harsher. Writer George Orwell dismissed the Sagrada Familia as one of the ugliest buildings he had ever seen. Meanwhile, artist Salvador Dalí argued that it should remain unfinished forever, preserved exactly as it was beneath a giant glass dome. Even the few stonemasons still working on the site were often mocked by local residents, who believed the unfinished church would eventually be demolished to make room for ordinary housing. To many people, the Sagrada Familia no longer represented the future. It represented a dream that should be left in the past. But despite all the criticism, despite the missing designs, and despite decades of uncertainty, the architects had managed to recover Gaudí's vision, and they refused to let the dream die. The Sagrada Familia had survived, but surviving wasn't enough. Because even after rebuilding Gaudí's vision, two enormous obstacles still stood in the way of completing it. The first was money, and the second was even bigger. The technology to build what Gaudí had imagined simply didn't exist yet. The race toward completion. For nearly half a century, construction continued, but only at a painfully slow pace. Then, during the 1980s, everything began to change. Under Chief Architect Jordi Bonet y Armengol, large parts of the unfinished Sagrada Familia were opened to visitors. For the first time, millions of people could walk inside Gaudí's masterpiece while it was still being built. And every ticket they bought helped pay for the next stage of construction. The money problem that had slowed the project for generations was finally beginning to ease. But solving the financial problem was only half the battle. The bigger breakthrough came as the world entered the 21st century. Instead of cutting and shaping every stone high above the ground, engineers completely changed the way the church was built. Most of the work moved to a specialized workshop in Galera, outside Barcelona. There, giant computer-controlled CNC machines, equipped with diamond blades, cut each stone with extraordinary precision, often to within less than a single millimeter. That level of accuracy was essential because almost every stone in the Sagrada Familia had a unique shape. After the rough cutting was finished, skilled stonemasons carefully shaped and polished every piece by hand, making sure the new stone matched the parts built more than a century earlier. Then came another breakthrough. Instead of lifting hundreds of individual stones into the air, engineers assembled them into enormous curved panels before they even reached the construction site. Each panel contained 16 precisely cut stone blocks, locked together with hidden stainless steel rods. Once they arrived in Barcelona, giant cranes simply lifted the finished panels into place. What once took months could now be completed in days. The transformation was extraordinary. From 1882 to around 2010, nearly 130 years of work had completed only about 60% of the Sagrada Familia. But using these new construction methods, engineers built almost all of the remaining 40% in little more than a decade. Then came another historic milestone. On November 7, 2010, Pope Benedict XVI consecrated the Sagrada Familia as a minor basilica. That meant it was no longer just a construction project. It had officially become a functioning Catholic church where Mass could be celebrated. The ceremony brought worldwide attention and millions of new visitors, providing even greater support for the project. Now, the pace of construction accelerated like never before. On December 8, 2021, workers completed the 138-meter Tower of the Virgin Mary and crowned it with a giant illuminated 12-point glass star that lit up Barcelona's skyline for the very first time. It was the clearest sign yet that Gaudí's dream was entering its final chapter. Then, on February 20th, 2026, workers installed the massive 17-meter cross on top of the Tower of Jesus Christ, allowing the Sagrada Familia to finally reach its full planned height of 172.5 meters. More than 144 years after the first stone was laid, Gaudí's masterpiece had finally reached the height he had imagined, and it was finally time to celebrate the achievement. So, on June 10, 2026, Barcelona witnessed a night unlike anything in the church's history. The night history was made on June 10, 2026, exactly 100 years after Antoni Gaudí's death. The world gathered in Barcelona for a moment many believed would never happen. Before the celebrations began, Pope Leo XIV quietly descended into the crypt beneath the Sagrada Familia, where Gaudí is buried. There he paused in prayer before the architect's tomb. Above him stood the church Gaudí had devoted the final years of his life to, now finally crowned with the Tower of Jesus Christ. It was a powerful moment. A century after Gaudí died, believing he would never see his masterpiece completed, the leader of the Catholic Church had come to honor the dream he left behind. Then, the celebration moved above ground. More than 120,000 people packed the streets surrounding the basilica, while Barcelona closed off entire city blocks to handle the enormous crowds. Giant outdoor screens were set up for the thousands who couldn't get inside. Within the church's towering stone forest, Pope Leo XIV celebrated a solemn mass before nearly 3,000 invited guests, including Felipe VI, Letizia Ortiz Rocasolano, heads of state, and hundreds of bishops and cardinals from around the world. But the audience extended far beyond Barcelona. The ceremony was broadcast live to more than 80 countries and streamed across major online platforms, drawing an estimated 25 million viewers worldwide. As night fell, thousands of people held glowing candles while music filled the air. Then, the Sagrada Familia slowly lit up. The Tower of Jesus Christ shone for the first time. Drones filled the sky with giant displays, and fireworks exploded above the church. For a few unforgettable minutes, all eyes in Barcelona were fixed on the same place. For millions watching around the world, it wasn't just the completion of a building. It was the end of a journey that had lasted 144 years. But, as extraordinary as that night was, its true meaning went far beyond the celebration itself. The meaning behind that night. The celebration on June 10th was about far more than just completing a church. It represented several historic milestones that had never happened before. First, the Sagrada Familia officially became the tallest church in the world. At 172.5 meters, it surpassed Germany's Ulm Minster, which had held the record since 1890. After more than a century, Spain became home to the world's tallest church, giving Barcelona a new place in Christian history. But there was another reason the moment felt so special. Just 1 year earlier, in April 2025, the Vatican had declared Antoni Gaudí venerable. In simple words, the Church officially recognized that he had lived an extraordinary Christian life. It also brought him one important step closer to becoming the first architect in history to be declared a saint. Then there was Pope Leo XIV himself. He became only the third pope ever to visit the Sagrada Familia, but the first to bless it after it had finally reached the height Gaudí had envisioned more than a century earlier. So these were the key moments that gave that night its real significance. Yet, perhaps the most touching moment of the entire ceremony wasn't the fireworks, or the world leaders, or even the completed tower itself. It was a young blind girl named Valentina. Standing beside Pope Leo XIV, she guided his hands across a specially made 3D model of the Tower of Jesus Christ, with Braille inscriptions, allowing him to experience the tower through touch just as she did. In a celebration watched by millions, It became one of the quietest moments, and perhaps the most unforgettable. But here is something many people still don't realize. Even after finally reaching its full height, the Sagrada Familia is still not completely finished. And what's left isn't just another construction project. It could decide how Gaudí's story finally ends. One last chapter. After watching the celebrations, it's easy to think the Sagrada Familia is finally complete. But that isn't entirely true. To understand why, we have to look at Gaudí's original master plan. Today, the 18 towers, the breathtaking interior, and almost all of the church's exterior have been completed. But one major part of Gaudí's vision is still missing. In 1916, his final design included a monumental 60-meter-wide staircase and plaza stretching out from the glory facade, creating a grand entrance to the church. Back then, the area in front of the basilica was mostly open land. Today, it's a very different story. Homes, apartment buildings, businesses, and busy streets now occupy that same space. Building the staircase exactly as Gaudí envisioned could require the demolition of around 150 buildings and force as many as 3,000 residents to relocate. And with Barcelona already facing a housing shortage and growing opposition to over-tourism, the challenge has become far more complicated than it first appears. Finding a solution that respects both Gaudí's vision and the people who live there won't be easy. But if the past has taught us anything, it's that the Sagrada Familia has overcome challenges that once seemed impossible. It survived the death of its architect. It survived wars, economic crises, missing designs, and decades of uncertainty. For 144 years, generation after generation refused to let the dream disappear. Perhaps that is the Sagrada Familia's greatest achievement. Not simply that it became the tallest church in the world, but that so many people, across more than a century, chose to keep believing in a dream they knew they might never see completed. In the end, the Sagrada Familia is more than stone, towers, or architecture. It is proof that faith, patience, and determination can outlive generations. For 144 years, thousands of architects, engineers, craftsmen, workers, and ordinary people refused to let Gaudí's dream disappear. And because of them, the impossible became reality. So what impressed you the most about the legendary journey of Sagrada Familia? And if you visited this incredible landmark yourself, what was the experience like? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you don't want to miss more amazing stories like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.